Rhubarb is one of the first fruits that comes up in the spring. There's not much else to eat at this time of year. And that's why for a lot of history, this was known as starving time. You would think that the dead of winter would be the hungriest time when there just isn't any food, but actually it's right now. So to have something like rhubarb coming up in your garden, this was a real treat, especially for pioneer families out here on the Montana frontier. Now, rhubarb by itself is not sweet. It's very, very tart. So you have to add sugar to it. And this time of year, you're not gonna have apples, you're not gonna have strawberries, you're not gonna have a lot of things that our modern recipes might add to rhubarb to sweeten it. So what did people do in history? I mean, what would a homesteader out here have added to their rhubarb to make it sweet enough to get those vitamins and get that nutrition into their family? The things you added to this pie probably would not have been expensive, refined white sugar. That was pretty special. But out here at the end of all the railroads, a lot of food had to come up the Missouri River, and you couldn't grow that much out here on the prairie. So I'm convinced they probably would have added sorghum, molasses, or brown sugar. And I'm thinking I have one other thing to add to the top of this at the very end that I've never seen a recipe for, but I absolutely believe somebody would have done this. That's gonna go on at the very end of our pie, and we'll see if those flavors work together. But it's another way to add sweetness to a very tart recipe. And of course, I think I need to bring in some taste testers for it. I've gone through some of these cookbooks. I'm going to use brown sugar and I'm going to drizzle this with molasses. And those are the two ways that we're going to even out that balance of tart and sweet, and we'll be able to get a delicious rhubarb pie at the end of the day. It's a beautiful time of year in Montana. Everything's coming to life. Today I've heard the sandhill cranes calling, the killdeers are swooping down over the roof, and boy, it's just a beautiful time. So early spring, you can see the grass is starting to grow, you're planting your garden, but really nothing's ready yet. Nothing is ready to eat. So you're relying on your holdovers from your root cellar that you harvested in the fall, and they have been feeding you all through the winter. But this time right now, pretty much all that food is gone.
This was a tough time of year, and people were getting pretty desperate. But this pie, this would have been heaven. All right, let's jump right into the pie crust, because often people find pie crust difficult and even intimidating. It's very simple ingredients, but the magic is in how they come together, and it's very possible to mess up a pie crust. Old recipes like this one in this beautiful Montana cookbook from the turn of the century often call pie crust pie paste, which is an old term. And they almost exclusively call for lard, not butter, not Crisco, pure leaf lard. That was something everyone kind of knew and understood back then, but we have completely forgotten. So these recipes call for approximately a 1-to-2 ratio of lard to flour. So for us today, making a top and a bottom crust, that's gonna look like a little less than a cup of lard to 2 cups of flour. That should be enough to get our whole, somewhat small pie done. Now, a good friend of mine loved the lard biscuits we baked on here, and she was determined to find lard so that she could make this herself. So she bought some lard marketed as a quite fancy, expensive product. But in truth, it was just lots of bits of fat from throughout the beef cow that were rendered and labeled as a fancy lard. But this was not leaf lard, and it ended up having a definitive beefy aroma and taste to it, and the recipe just didn't turn out right. So what you want to look for when you're searching for lard is pure leaf lard. It is out there to order, but you have to hunt for it a little bit. And you must look specifically for the word leaf lard. That's the hardest fat, the kidney fat, rendered down, and it has almost no flavor, just a mild, appetizing smell to it. So that's magic trick number 1 for pie. And trust me, it is worth the search. Magic trick number 2 is keeping everything cold.
But the real trick to pie, and it's the difference between a great pie and a tough, difficult pie, is to keep all the ingredients cool. Now in a cabin like this today, That's not that hard. Everything's starting off at a pretty cool temperature. The flour, the butter, and the lard.
The cast iron we will want to preheat so it's hot when it goes in the oven, but we don't want the pie crust to touch it until the very moment it goes in.
Okay, so I've got the flour and the salt all mixed up, and now it's time to get the lard into this dough. So that's the fat that's gonna bind everything together and make those flaky layers happen. And lard is really the key to that. But I like to add just a bit of butter because the butter in a pie crust adds flavor and the lard adds texture. So I'm adding just a few slices of butter into my bowl of lard that I've shaved off. And I've got about 2 cups of flour, which means I should have about a cup of lard and butter total. All right, that looks pretty good to me. But I'm gonna try to mix this quickly and rub it together with my fingers, but I don't wanna heat all the ingredients up. I just wanna break every piece of lard and butter into little pea-size amounts. And once I've got that, I add a little tiny bit of water, just enough to bring it together. I don't wanna add too much or I'll get a tough pie crust. And then I'm going to put a towel over that and let it rest while I get the rest of our rhubarb pie ingredients together. So here we go. The trick to pie: work fast and work cold. I'm trying really hard here not to overwork this dough. I don't want to develop the glutens. I don't want any of that. I just want it to hold together so that I can roll it out nice and thin. All right. I'm gonna cover that with a dish towel and let it rest.
Let's get that rhubarb stewing on the cook stove. Now I only harvested a small bit as my rhubarb transplant is still young. And you can kill it by taking too much in the early spring. The plant needs those stalks and leaves to feed itself. No doubt early pioneers who brought cuttings of rhubarb with them across on the wagon trains faced this same situation. With time, the plants get large and healthy and more can be taken. But a drop of water in the clay saucepan and a heaping handful of diced up rhubarb gets this meal in motion. And it probably should be said, never ever eat the leaves of a rhubarb plant. Don't feed them to your chickens, don't do anything with them. They are poisonous. I don't know who the first person to figure that out was, but the stalks are delicious and the leaves are deadly. Don't mix them up.
Now, pies were a very common food of the past. Sweet pies, savory pies, and there's a reason for that. It's because this is a really efficient and good way to get a hearty meal using basic ingredients like flour and lard and anything else you might have kicking about. So I'm using about half refined sifted flour and half Rouge de Bordeaux that was milled with a stone grist mill, so it still has some of the bran in it. And that's something today, we're so used to white flour, and throughout history, everybody has wanted white flour because it's soft and lovely, pretty much goes with anything. But pioneers out here, people who were trying to survive, they understood that a lot of the nutrition is in the wheat bran itself. So when you mill flour, you don't want to sift everything out of it. Whenever possible, you want to at least eat some of that wheat bran. So for a dessert, if you do 100% whole wheat, it might be a little bit dense. But for today's recipe, I want that nutty flavor. I want to taste the heritage wheat in this. So about half and half of the flour of white and wheat flour is exactly what I'm going for here. It's gonna give us a little more color to the pie crust, but it's also gonna give us flavor. And if we were trying to survive out here, day after day, all through this starving time of spring, we would wanna be eating that wheat bran. That is where so many of the vitamins and minerals of wheat get incorporated into our food and our bodies. So sifting all of them out, it's just a little bit crazy. So I'm making a conscious effort today to leave a little bit of that bran in, but it'll be a test to see how it turns out.
Now for the rhubarb filling of this pie. We have our handful of fresh rhubarb that's been stewing on the stove, and it's just starting to break down. So we need to bump up the sweetness with another old cookbook recipe, we're gonna put our own poor pioneer twist on Grandma Frank's cookbook, Rhubarb Pie. This was a woman who fed a lot of people on the western remote lands back in the day, and her recipes reflect that era. She calls for rhubarb, a couple tablespoons of flour, dash of salt, some sugar, an egg yolk, and a pat of butter. Our recipe for this cast iron skillet pie, which I'll make a bit smaller as I don't have a family of 12 to feed, will have a heaping cup of stewed rhubarb. We'll have melted butter and a small teacup of brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of flour, a dash of salt, an egg yolk, just like hers does, with a drizzle of molasses for depth. Remember, white sugar was expensive, and fruit sugars weren't easy to come by this time of year. So to have a sweet pie like this would have been a very special treat. And the vitamins from the stalks of a fresh plant would have been majorly desired after a long winter.
I've looked through a lot of old cookbooks, dug through recipes, and really rhubarb recipes don't come into play until the 1800s. You see some of it throughout the 1700s, but it's just being discovered. It was sort of considered medicinal up until that point. This is very much a modified recipe, inspired by a lot of different historical recipes from old cookbooks. Most of those recipes date to the 1800s and early 1900s, but today we're definitely putting our own twist on it, trying to come up with ways that a pioneer out here would have eaten it. Because a lot of these humble foods, they never made it into the cookbooks. Cookbooks are often reserved for fancy foods, city foods. There wasn't a lot written about what the common person ate, and certainly the common person who was barely getting by. So this pie combines a little bit of both. It's a little bit special, but it's also pretty humble.
All right, the crust is rolled out and the filling is made. Let's get a lattice lid onto this pie. That skillet sat on top of the cook stove and is well preheated. The bottom of an old wood-burning cook stove is the coolest part of the oven, the top the hottest. So using a preheated cast iron skillet gives me some peace of mind that the bottom crust will avoid sogginess. So the cold bottom crust goes into the hot iron skillet. The rhubarb brown sugar filling is poured in next, and a drizzle of that beautiful old-fashioned molasses makes sure that this pie won't be too tart. Now quickly over the top, I need to get that lattice woven. There's nothing fancy here. This is a rustic pie, but I want the lattice style so that I can see the pink bubbling goodness of the rhubarb poking through the crust when I serve this. After all, to have color in the spring after a long winter of root vegetables and probably just grains or potatoes, well, a vibrantly colored food is half the enjoyment of this meal. And that secret ingredient we have planned for the end will be a major boost of color as well. We pop the pie into a screaming hot oven, probably 450, maybe hotter.
Hot oven!
And it's slowly gonna cool down as it bakes because I'm not gonna add more firewood. It's not gonna lower rapidly, just slowly. We want that lard and butter to steam in the hot oven and create those flaky layers in the crust. A cold oven won't do it. It has to be hot. So as we wait, the dishes get washed. There's no running water here. And before you know it, the pie is out.
Okay, this rhubarb pie looks amazing, but I'm gonna let it cool down for a bit because I have a few extra plans to take it just that little bit over the top. But in ways that I think a homesteader out here, someone living off the land, absolutely would have done themselves. I can't prove it, but from the bit I know about the foods available, especially at this early time of year, I think these next things are something they would have done.
I did miss a couple of tricks here. The recipe doesn't say it, but you can use that egg white that was left over to brush the lattice and then sprinkle it with cinnamon and sugar if you want to take this pie that much over the top. But humble is okay for today.
Now, because I did half of this crust with Rouge de Bordeaux wheat flour, where it was stone milled and we left the wheat bran in, it has almost that graham smell, like a graham cracker. A huge reason to leave it in is that it's added nutrition. You're not losing the vital key nutrient parts of flour when you sift it out for white flour. but 100% whole wheat, 100% gram is pretty intense. So we've cut it 50-50, but I can already smell the gram in it and it smells incredible. But that gram aroma, I really think is gonna add something to the flavor of this pie. I'm gonna go get little George, and he's gonna be my taste tester for this old-fashioned rhubarb and molasses pie with a twist.
Well, sure enough, young George was eager to help with the next step of this pie, the whipped cream. You guys may remember the homemade butter attempt we made out here, and lots of people suggested putting cream in a mason jar to get that same result. Well, this is that idea. Now, I learned this one years and years ago from James Townsend and Son, and it works a treat. Cold cream in a handmade ceramic jar, a little butter on the lid to seal it, and shake away.
I found it. Remember that plum mask?
Oh, remember that?
It's the candle snuffle.
That is.
Snuff.
Now I'm making a darn mess all over myself. My butter-tight lid isn't quite cutting the mustard, but that's all right. We'll just do this job outside in the glorious spring sunshine, so no complaints here. And in no joke, in less than a handful of minutes, we had perfect whipped cream. Boom!
Ah, whipped cream.
No sugar added, no vanilla, although those things are nice. But I want this to be a mild, creamy pairing with the sweet tart pie. And while the stove was still hot earlier, I put a few scoops of thick chokecherry jelly into the warming oven with a tablespoon of water, so it would slowly thin into a topping for this dessert. Now, what would a frontiers person out here have used to sweeten a pie? Well, a bit of expensive sugar, hopefully, but perhaps a jar of chokecherry preserves that they'd held over the long winter. Chokecherry is a native plant out here, and if you let it go long enough into the freezing fall weather, it will get quite sweet. And that is exactly what I'm sure many a cook used to complement a venison steak or to add to a dessert that they needed an extra dose of flavor for. So let's sit down and eat this beautiful taste of spring. Robbie's here, George is chomping at the bit. A slice of pie goes on everyone's pewter plate, a heap of fresh whipped cream, and a dollop of chokecherry. Oh, and a dusting of cinnamon. Spices, even in the late 1800s, would surely have been used sparingly out here. Not easy to get shipped in and impossible to grow in the cold north.
Yes.
Oh, this one is a Georgie fork, but Dad can't eat what this fork looks like. Covered in jam.
After I love it.
Pretty good.
Can I steal your fork, George?
It's got a pumpkin pie taste.
That could be the molasses.
Here.
And that
It's got the tartness, for sure.
Right. This tastes wonderful. Yeah, George is just inhaling it.
super, super, super.
Thank you, George.
I love it.
It's not every day we think about really eating seasonally, but for most of history, that was all we had. And I'll tell you what, it feels a heck of a lot better to eat this way, connected to the ingredients. A walk after lunch in the fresh spring air let me see what wildflowers were just starting to peek through the ever-warming ground.
All right, I've hiked up the big hill. I got us a bouquet of wildflowers. Whew. That sandhill crane flew right over the top of us. They are huge. They are like a dinosaur. But he's disappeared now. Maybe he'll come back. And there's Uncle Dan's, right down below. It's deceptive how steep these hills are. Just a lonely cabin, surrounded by lonely fields. You can just glimpse it from the highway, from a distance away. Almost looks like nobody's touched it in 150 years. But we know it has a little more life than that. We've got shooting stars, we've got some arrowleaf balsam root, purple prairie clover, and old man's beard. There's still some crocuses hiding in the cool parts of the forest, but this is sort of the next wave of spring flowers on our way to summer. Thank you everybody for hanging out with us today. We'll take our bouquet of flowers and we'll see you next time. Cheers everybody. You boys have made my day. Thank you.
So I think that will be this day.
You
Paper pie, yummy, yummy in the sky. Georgie took his thumb and pulled out a plum pie.